everybody, and welcome back to the grand return of Studio Series versus their original figures. This is essentially a series where we take 3 Studio Series releases and compare them alongside their original counterparts to see whether or not they are in fact an improvement or a downgrade. Now, this was a series that I launched last year and I kind of put it on a 1-year hiatus, but today we are back with a Decepticon baddie special as we're going to be taking a look at the Fallen, Dark of the Moon Soundwave and Galvatron. Now, to get stuck straight into the video, here we have Dark of the Moon Soundwave, and this is going to be quite an interesting discussion to say the least. So slap bang in the centre, we have the Studio Series version, our newest release of this character by Hasbro, and on the left we have the original Dark of the Moon 2011 Deluxe and the Human Alliance Movie the Best version. Now, both of these figures originally were actually cancelled by Hasbro. They were released in some of the last few waves of the Dark of the Moon movie line, meaning that for the longest time, the Studio Series version has always been the best pickup for collectors to actually get this guy into the collection, as these ones were so rare and elusive. But with that being said, is this much of an upgrade when compared to these previous two? Well, let's actually dissect that. So first of all, here we have him alongside his original deluxe counterpart, and personally, I think proportion-wise, the Studio Series version hands down wins. I mean, it's a lot more stocky and a bit more broad when in comparison to this version, and the paint job on the SS version is an absolute killer. I mean, this thing was literally coated head to toe in so much metallic silver, whereas it's sad to say, but the original cancelled 2011 release looked absolutely disgusting. I mean, the grey plastic is just the most bland and boringest tone they could have possibly have gone with, and it's such a shame considering that this was a brand new movie design for the Transformers Michael Bay films at the time. But the head sculpt was definitely the redeeming factor about this figure. I mean, that thing was fully picked out in silver and kind of resembled the Decepticon insignia as a head sculpt, so that was kind of crazy. But my favourite thing from this would have to be the MechTech weapon. The MechTech weapons and the MechTech ports that I've mentioned so many times over on the channel, but this thing was just sick. So we had this super cool kind of sonic blaster cannon which could convert into a radar dish, and in my opinion, I mean, this has got to be one of the best MechTech weapons that we ever saw from the 2011 toy line. This thing was just awesome. It's just a shame that on the deluxe figures you couldn't lock it into place, meaning that it continuously wanted to spring itself back into a cannon, but still really awesome. But in terms of design, yeah, this one was a little weak, and for some strange reason he had this kind of floating panel which just looks so bizarre. So at least in terms of this comparison, in my opinion, the Studio Series version, at least in robot mode, is definitely the winner. Now we bring in the Human Alliance version. Now, comparison wise, this is going to be a little unfair, as considering that this is a much bigger and then of course warranted a higher price point when in comparison to the deluxe release. But if you're after the best kind of official version of DOTM Soundwave, I'm going to be honest guys and say that at least in my personal opinion, the Human Alliance version is better, just as an all-rounder. Now, this figure had a few issues in the proportion department. I mean, he had these massive chunky arms and then these super skinny kind of spaghetti-like legs, and it definitely did cause for a few problems in regards to stability. But if you just kind of forget about the legs and focus on the upper half, especially with the movie The Best redeco, this thing looked absolutely nuts, and to be quite honest, could give a few of those third-party companies a run for their money. Toy Lab, I'm looking at you, as their release was an absolute train wreck. But yeah, I loved this guy and I still love it even to this day. It is such a sick Human Alliance figure, and it's such a shame that those figures did actually become discontinued. Now, as we compare them, as you guys can see, I think the metallic silver again is better on the movie The Best redeco. If there was anything that maybe the SS version did a little better, it would of course be the legs. These are just a little bit more proportional when in comparison to this version, but as an all-rounder, undeniably, at least to me, the Human Alliance version in bot mode demolishes this release. But another positive that the Studio Series version had was that when you would rotate the arm, it wouldn't actually take the wheels with it. They did lock into place, much like the original deluxe version, although this was a little clunky because it had this kind of shoulder pad that would continuously bump into this section. So the SS version improved upon that, and definitely improved upon what we got with the Human Alliance release, as you would basically have to hinge this up and rotate this entire chunk to actually get the arm to move. So that was unfortunate. It would have been super cool had they found a way to have pegged these into those MechTech ports, but anyhow, definitely, Human Alliance version, in my opinion, is still superior. And here we have all 3 versions of Soundwave fully transformed up into their Mercedes-Benz SLS AMG vehicle mode. And I'm pretty certain you guys can already tell which is going to be the winner out of the 3. But before we touch base here with the Human Alliance version, I just want to quickly say something. All 3 of these share a very similar transformation, and my goodness me, is it horrific. I mean, at one point, I was actually going to toss this figure out of the window and hope a car trampled on it, as it is so frustrating. But as we just compare the deluxe to deluxe ratio. As you guys can see, here on the right we have the new Studio Series version, and then on the left the old Dark of the Moon 2011 release. And to be honest, I don't think there's much of a contest to be had here. The new version hands down obliterates the old previous release. I mean, I don't know what Hasbro were thinking. To be quite honest, the plastic is just disgusting. I mean, the shade of grey is just so bland and boring, and it looks super depressing. I mean, I definitely don't want this thing in my collection anymore, as it is such an eyesore. I mean, it does have some pretty nice sculpt work, but it really needed to have some super sick silver applied over the top. So unfortunately, this is definitely inferior when in comparison to our superior Studio Series version. But can it still remain superior? Well, let's bring out the Human Alliance release. Now again, this is a slightly unfair comparison, as of course this is a lot cheaper when in comparison to what the Human Alliance figures originally retailed for. But again, hands down, if you're after the best official version of Soundwave, at least in my opinion, the Human Alliance version takes the cake. I mean, especially with this Movie the Best redeco, the vehicle mode just looks stunning. Human Alliance figures truly were in a league of their own, and I kind of think they were unofficial masterpiece figures by Hasbro at the time, as they were just so nicely done. As you guys can see, this thing has been fully painted in silver, and I love the smoky plastic that they've used for the windows. It literally looks like the real vehicle we're seeing in the movie. You can see we've got some nice Mercedes detailing scattered all the way throughout this thing. I just think it looks so awesome, and considering it was Human Alliance, it did actually have the proper opening doors, which I just thought was insane, and it has surprisingly some interior detailing such as a seat as well as a steering wheel. So hands down, this version is the best in my opinion, but not to take anything away from the Studio Series release. For its price point, I actually think it was pretty nifty, but this version to me just takes it to a whole other level. Now next up we have a relatively new character to the Studio Series, that being Age of Extinction Galvatron. Now this has got to be one of the most anticipated entries into the line, and did it deliver? Well, yes and no. It had some good aspects but some bad aspects, and to be quite honest, I think it's just got to do with the design. The designs from those Transformers 4 movies were super difficult to kind of replicate in action figure form, because the vehicle mode pieces literally vanished on the bot mode. But all three of these I think have good and bad points, and some of you guys may be wondering, what the heck is that thing on the right? Well, I brought it out as I actually think it's going to cause for quite an interesting discussion in just a second. But of course, you guys are here for the Voyager to Voyager comparison, and here we have the new version on the right and the old version on the left. Now both of them have pros and cons. I'd say the biggest improvement that the Studio Series version has is that it's actually a Transformer and not a shell former. As we turn both of them here to the back, as you guys can see, the design team did actually sculpt the back of this guy, and pretty much all of the main vehicle mode was hidden internally and in the legs, where you couldn't say the same here for the old release. As you guys can see, it was essentially IKEA flat packed onto his back, and it was a pretty cool piece of engineering back in the day, I won't lie. I mean, basically it had this whole chunk which would scoot forwards and compress. I thought that was kind of cool, but in terms of a Transformer, it left a lot to be desired when actually transforming it, and yeah, from a back perspective it didn't look too great. But from the front, however, I really like the stocky and broad proportions. Definitely does resemble Galvatron from the Transformers 4 movie, but the paint was severely lacking. Now this is actually the Takara release, and even this is missing a lot of paint apps. I believe on the original version it didn't have the grey on the face piece, and the actual kind of hole in the chest wasn't painted, but even with those additional improvements, I don't think this here looks particularly great in the paint department, whereas the Studio Series release undeniably has a lot more paint apps, but dare I say needed a bit more just to spice up some of the components that we have here. Now detail wise, this thing is nuts, especially as we take a look here at the head. I thought this guy was really cool, but if I were to be super critical, I'd say this was slightly too skinny. So had they found a middle ground between the two of these, I think we could have been left with maybe the best version of Galvatron Hasbro could ever put out. But as it stands, I definitely think there is still a tiny bit of room for improvement with this Studio Series version. So is it much of an upgrade in bot mode? Again, yes and no. It's kind of a divided opinion in my mind. Now as we talk accessories, the Studio Series version came with a cluster of missiles as well as the arm cannon, whereas the original release merely just came with the arm cannon, which dare I say again is better than the Studio Series release. I mean, it is much thicker like it was in the movie, a little more detailed too, and I think these kind of prongs that would stick off to the side look a little cooler when in comparison to what we got here with the SS release, and this actually had a missile firing gimmick which still works pretty effectively. Now granted, we don't get any form of of missiles on modern Transformers, so I can't really complain that much in that department, but weapon-wise, I still think in terms of sculpt, the older release is definitely better. Now we're going to take a look at, I think it was the Power Attack Galvatron. This was one of those toy gimmick-inspired releases, and I actually think for what this is, it's really cool. So as we bring back the original 2014 Voyager, I thought it incorporated some of the vehicle mode components a little better. As you guys can see, it doesn't have nowhere near as much of a big backpack when in comparison to this release, and it had a super sick color deco. I mean, I loved the gunmetal grey they gave this guy, and I would love to see this type of color deco actually put on a proper mainline Galvatron, and not to mention it was painted really nicely. I mean, we had this big circular piece in the chest, metallic blue tubes, loads of detailing for the arms and for the shins. For a gimmick toy, this wasn't too bad at all, and it is loaded with mechanical detail in pretty much every single area. And I'm certain you guys want to very quickly see what that kind of attack gimmick is, and it was basically that you took the backpack, at least this backpack had a purpose, pulled it forwards, and it would cause this thing to eject and kind of give this supercharged burst, which was cool. I did like the way that looked. It's just a shame that we didn't see him utilize this feature in the movie, as I think it could have caused for a really cool sequence. So as far as bot mode goes, I think all three of these have good and bad. There's not really one that I personally think is a definitive winner over the other, but let's get them transformed up into vehicle mode. And here we have Galvatron fully activated and transformed up into his Freightliner Argosy truck mode, a truck mode which looks sick. And I remember when this was first seen on set, many of us actually believed this to be our first look at a live action movie Motormaster, but sadly it turned out to be Galvatron. But anyhow, again we have the SS version slap bang in the centre, the gimmick one on the right, and the original 2014 Voyager on the left. And at least here in truck mode, I think there's a definitive winner, and it is the original version. I know that's going to be quite shocking to say, but as we just compare them from a side perspective, I mean, what on earth? What's this thing here at the back? What are those? The feet just hanging out of the back of the trailer bed definitely left a lot to be desired, and it wasn't until you took a look at it from a front-on perspective that the truck actually looked decent. And to be honest, it does look decent. I mean, the sculpt work is fantastic for the front, and even from this angle with my fingers kind of covering this back piece, it looks pretty nice, but sadly the illusion is very quickly lost as this looks ugly. Now of course there is a reason for this. As mentioned previously, this guy actually transformed quite a bit more when in comparison to this, which I'd say you can convert in roughly 10 seconds once you get the hang of it, but this just cleaned up so nicely. They even gave us the attention to detail of an actual trailer hitch, which I thought was kind of cool, and I just like how the cab comes together. Considering it doesn't transform as much as this version, it is a lot cleaner in terms of panel lines. So it really does just depend on what you guys want. Do you want a slightly more complex transformer, which has a more compromised vehicle mode, which to be honest, I'm absolutely fine for. Like I've said in many of my reviews, I'd much rather the Hasbro team sacrifice the alt mode over the bot mode any day of the week, but it is just something that I thought was worth bearing in mind. And then when we bring in the gimmick-based toy, again, I'm sorry to say guys, but I actually think this is a little cooler looking as far as the truck mode goes, as it doesn't have those toes just flaring out of the back. It does kind of conceal all of those bot mode pieces quite a bit, but this was really cool for a gimmick-based toy. I mean, check out the details that we had here for the front. This thing definitely was sick. I hope someone used it to sleep on this. It's just for a fun kind of gimmick-based figure. This is actually quite enjoyable to mess around with. So yeah, cool looking truck mode. But let me know down in the comment section below, out of the three, which is your preferred Galvatron, and just as a whole, which one do you think is the definitive best version we've gotten so far? The 2014 Voyager, the new Studio Series release, or this tiny little gimmick-based version? And then finally, we take a look at the segment that I'm sure you guys have all been waiting for, The Fallen. And to tell the truth, this is the reason why I brought these videos back, just to give me another chance to tell you guys how much I love the Studio Series The Fallen. It is literally the ideal Fallen figure for me, and I could never have imagined that they would have upgraded on the hunt for the Decepticons version as much as they did. But to kickstart things off, just considering how massive The Fallen is, we're going to bring one comparison in at a time. So here we have our new SS The Fallen compared alongside the original 2009 version. This thing is literally a relic at this point, and as you guys can see, despite this being kind of the first time Hasbro ever approached this design, I think they did a smashing job. I mean, this guy actually looks kind of nuts in terms of how alien and accurate he was to the movie, but granted, it had its flaws. The colour scheme was just way off, and if anything, he kind of resembled more of a cockroach, especially as we zoom in on that head sculpt. But I did like the arms, and one thing I will say this guy has, which the SS version is lacking, is a waist joint, which really does make all of the difference. So had they added a waist joint into the SS SS version, it would have been literally borderline masterpiece. But things the Studio Series version does which is better, pretty much everything besides the waist, to be honest. It has the staff, it has the removable face gimmick, it has a much more accurate colour scheme, and the feet. My goodness me, the feet were something that I was just praying Hasbro wouldn't get wrong with the SS version, as on the first couple of Fallens, for whatever reason, they were spring-loaded, and this was absolutely the bane of my existence back in the day. These things were just horrific. It was so difficult to get this guy in any type of poses, and I just really don't know what the design team back then were thinking when they packed spring-loaded gimmick into the feet. But a gimmick this guy did have was Mech Alive, and just to showcase what that basically was, you would take the Fallen's head, flip it forward. Okay, the head does actually come off. I don't think it's meant to do that, but you'd flip it forwards and bang, it would reveal these additional kind of main pieces, which I guess were supposed to simulate the burning effect that the Fallen had. We could also take these sections here on the biceps and hinge them up, which again created for a slightly more fiery look. And then in addition to that, you could also hinge these panels forwards, which again would showcase some nice lovely red plastic, and it's quite cool. Another thing, if I was to be super critical that this one does a little better, would be the whole orange paint app. I do wish that we could have got just a tad more orange on this Fallen, especially in the thighs, and maybe a little bit more here in the mid-torso, but that really is it. I mean, the head sculpt is a marked improvement, and I think the way they just managed the arms, especially with these appendages, were a lot better than this version, as first time round you essentially had to have these arms kind of fixed to the waist, which was super restrictive articulation wise to match how he appeared in the movie. But they did also bring out kind of a version 2.0 of the Fallen, which was slightly better than this release. That being the Hunt for the Decepticons version. Now, for the best part of a decade, this has been my definitive version of the Fallen until this release came in, but this was really cool. It did actually have quite a few improvements when in comparison to the version we just took a look at. It had proper kind of articulated hands, it had the removable give me your face gimmick, which now kind of looks a little stupid when in comparison to our new SS version, and it also came with the staff, so this was really cool. But the biggest issue that many collectors had with this one was the colours. I mean, as we actually compare them, the colours are worlds apart. I mean, yeah, the Fallen definitely had some blue highlights on him in the film, but not to the extent that we're seeing here for this guy. So undeniably, hands down, the new SS version obliterates any of the previous competition, and like I mentioned previously, this also had the give me your face, which had an astonishing head sculpt, way cooler when in comparison to what we got for the Hunt for the Decepticons version. And then for the final part of this video, we jump into the Fallen's alt mode. Now this is quite a hard one to judge, as the Fallen never actually transformed in the movie, so both of these alt modes are open to interpretation. I guess it's just which one you guys personally think is slightly cooler in terms of design. And again, I'm sorry guys, I know it sounds a bit like I'm bumbling the Studio Series release, but I just think this one looks so much more cooler. I mean, not only does it have the spear, which acts as these kind of missiles which attach onto the sides, but it just looks so cool, especially with the color deco. I love the cockpit and this whole front section, and there is kind of a secret sun harvester mode which I did showcase on the channel a few months back, so definitely be sure to check that out. And I also think these appendages do wonders for this alt mode. It just makes this look kind of like a proper alien battleship when in comparison to this, which looks a little more simplified in terms of design. And I did like how the design team basically based this alt mode on the original toy. I mean, transformation for both of them is pretty much identical with the exception of these additional appendages, so they really didn't change much as far as the conversion goes. They did just essentially give the exterior shell a massive makeover. But let me know down in the comment section below, out of the two, which is the one you prefer. Again, color deco wise, I definitely think this one also looks much cooler. Now I would show you a comparison with the Hunt for the Decepticons version, but it is just this release in kind of that weird greenish blue color, so I don't think you guys will really get much out of that. But yeah, those are the Fallen in their vehicle modes. And so there was kind of part 4, I guess you could say, the reboot of Studio Series versus their original characters. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. I don't think I'm going to be putting these out as frequently as I was last year. This will probably be similar to the end of year Studio Series videos I do, where it's more of an annual thing than just an every other week thing. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What do you guys think of the format? Is there any way that perhaps I could spice it up a little bit? And what do you guys think of the comparisons? I mean, out of the Fallen, Galvatron and Soundwave, do you think their Studio Series versions are in fact massively superior when in comparison to their past releases? I mean, of course, I think there are just hands down winners such as the Fallen, but Soundwave and Galvatron definitely are a little more interesting as far as the discussion goes. So be sure to sound off down in the comment section below, and until my next video, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.